Okay, I think I should start now. So let me share my screen. Good afternoon and welcome everyone to this EDICa seminar. Today we're going to talk about mental health in the RNI ecosystem and particularly look at the lived experiences of women. So I'm Nilay, Shah, I'm chairing, and we're going to have two talks from Dulini, Fernando and Hadar Elraz. So we have a code of conduct, and that's quite important for you to adhere to. So EDICa, of course, is designed to advise the community about inclusive environments, inclusive events, inclusive communications. So we expect everybody to adhere with the code of conduct that's you can see on the screen. And if you need some help with accessibility, the closed captions, which nowadays tend to work quite well, can be accessed by clicking the three dots at the bottom of your Zoom screen and selecting the closed caption option. So this is the agenda for today. I'll do a quick introduction, then explain how we got here, which is through the EDICa system and its flexible fund. We'll have two presentations, first on work and career experiences of women with mental health issues in STEM RNI, given by Dulini, Fernando and her team, and then a second presentation examining the workplace experiences of female academics with mental health conditions, with a specific focus on work intensification and intersectional effects, given by Hadar Elraz, and then we'll open up for discussion and Q&A. We have got the chat open for people if they want to chat with each other, but if you would like to pose a question to our panel, please use the Q&A link in the Zoom meeting. So please use the Q&A function, as I say. You can actually click on a voting option and upvote a question if it's one that you're particularly keen to have answered. And that way we'll make sure that we can prioritize those. As I say, chat is available as well, but the chat is for internal discussion. The panel and the presenters will not particularly be able to monitor the chat. They'll be looking at the Q&A. So these are our panelists. We have three researchers who have been looking at the first question: Dulini, Fernando, Krystal, Wilkinson, and Elena Meliu. So they will be associated with the workplace experiences talk. And then we have Hadar Elraz, who will be talking about the experiences of female academics with a specific focus on intensification and intersectional effects. So a bit about EDICa, the EDI caucus. It's funded by UK Research and Innovation with some support from the British Academy. And its key actions are, first of all, to research the evidence base for inclusive careers across the UK's RNI systems, particular focus on removing barriers experienced by a wide range of marginalized groups and supporting them to access and thrive in their chosen careers, to conduct interdisciplinary research, particularly trying to identify and diagnose what some of the issues are and provide recommendations for improvements, create national and international communities of practice, and wherever possible to use a co-design approach with stakeholders and people with lived experience. So it's really aiming to complement many of the really good things that are happening in RNI institutions already. As part of the process, we operate a flexible fund to which £1 million at 100% full economic cost has been allocated. And that allows us to commission research to address the many stubborn inequalities that we're quite familiar with, which persist in the RNI ecosystem. So these projects allow us to access the very best of what people are able to do in terms of investigation and research. And they allow us to advance knowledge on lived experience of marginalized researchers, develop and pilot and evaluate interventions to create meaningful change across the RNI system in the UK and internationally. So the Flexible Fund has been running each year, focusing on particular themes. So Workstream 1 has been on career life cycle, where 4 projects were selected in December 2023. Workstream 2 is the research process, where 4 projects were selected for funding in July 2024. And work stream 3 is organization of work, which means physical aspects like workplace arrangements, but also structures, procedures, operating principles, and the final assessments are just happening at the moment. We have a upcoming seminar, Mitigating the Effects of COVID-19, in about 3 weeks' time at 1:30. So do come along to that if you're interested. And we've had a lot of interesting seminars, some on tools, some on various experiences and so on. So we have a YouTube channel and our website. So again, if you want to see what we've been doing in the past, please have a look there. Please also have a look at our website more generally. We're constantly adding new things on there as we're developing our evidence base. So we have some very interesting new reports on there. So without further ado, then I'm going to pass on my chair to the first speaker. So Dulini, I hope you've managed to get everything set up, and I can hand over to you to give our first talk on work and career experiences of women with mental health issues in STEM R&I.
Thank you, Nilay. Would you be uploading the slides, Fernando?
Yep.
Okay. Right. Thank you, everyone, for having us today. I'll just briefly start with introducing our team and as well as this paper. So this presentation today is based on a co-authored paper, which is in submission to a journal right now. And it is about how highly skilled women in STEM enact their careers in the face of mental health issues. So I am Dulini, and I'm currently attached to Aston University. And my colleagues, Elena Milieu from Brunel University, London, and Krystal Wilkinson from Manchester Metropolitan University are here with us today. And Dr. Gustavo Sanchez Munoz, who was the researcher on this project, who was attached to Aston, but it is now in King's College, London. So this article is, this presentation is based on a research project that we all worked on. Right, could we flip the next slide? Okay, so I'll start with a brief preview of the literature on women and mental health issues in STEM, right? So as we know, the UK's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics workforce comprises of around approximately 2.8 million people, around which a quarter of them are women. And these women occupy various research and innovation roles in universities as well as in the industry. So studies indicate that the ideal worker in STEM, right, is intensely career-oriented, wholly dedicated to work, and achieves objective forms of success, where these expectations can be seen as gendered because they can differentially impact on women who may, for instance, find themselves marginalized or at a career disadvantage if they cannot conform to ideal work expectations due to out-of-work responsibilities. So in general, women in STEM are seen as experiencing higher levels of mental health issues such as stress, anxiety, and lower overall well-being in comparison to their male counterparts, right? And they are also seen as more likely than men to identify features of the workplace as affecting their mental health. But so given that women are already seen as struggling to fit this ideal worker image in STEM, we might imagine that those experiencing mental health issues may find themselves to be in an extremely difficult position. So we start with the notion that overall, we have little theoretical understanding of the interplay between mental health issues and women's career enactment in STEM. And that's what we want to talk about in this presentation. Okay, can you put it on to the next slide, please? Right. So to give you a bit of a preview into our studies, so we conducted one-to-one individual interviews with 30 female STEM professionals in the UK in early, mid, and late career. We recruited respondents via a combination of purposing and snowballing sampling, right? We posted a formal call on an array of social media and professional networking platforms for women professionals in STEM to share their experiences of work and career in the face of mental health issues. It was made clear in all our communications that the research team kept kept their definition of mental health issues broad, and this did not require a formal diagnosis of mental health issues. Right, so people responded to our call, and some people introduced other important people, and in this way the sample grew. Interviews in general lasted from 50 to 90 minutes, right? And most of the participants were British, right? About 90%, 80% of them were white, and everybody was highly educated, with 20 holding postgraduate degrees. So respondents range from 21 to 64 years of age, with an average of 38 years, and they predominantly worked in the industry, right? About around 27% worked in academia, right? And engineering, technology, biology, chemistry were the most common fields of expertise. At the time of data collection, all participants are self-identified with having experienced mental health issues at some point in their career, right? Next slide, please. So to tell you a bit about how we collected the data and analyzed it. So we had a pre-prepared topic guide which shaped the interview, and this topic guide addressed people's accounts of mental health issues, and the interplay between mental health issues and work in gendered STEM settings, for example, like institutionalized expectations, cultural norms, then the people's perceptions of career barriers encountered in the face of mental health issues, support structures and the extent to which these were seen as available and accessible, and the strategies that individuals use to maintain a career in the face of mental health issues. So our respondents talked about a diverse range of experience of mental health issues, right? Such as anxiety, depression, postnatal depression, acute stress disorders, eating disorders, burnout, panic attacks, nervous breakdowns, an array of them. And the majority of these issues can be formally classified as long-term disabilities, right? While the others were experienced at some points in their careers, right? So many individuals talked about more than one mental health issue, for example, anxiety and depression. And so we asked typically open-ended questions. We did not ask questions in any particular order. People were given the opportunity to respond, introduce their own topics and share their views. And we provided a very safe environment in our interviews. And but we ensured that all the topics in the interview guide were covered. Right. So the interviews were digitally recorded and they were transcribed verbatim. We use thematic analysis to analyze people's accounts. Okay, next slide, please. So what I'm going to do is just present the findings in three key themes, right? So the first theme, we will examine the contextual triggers of mental health issues within gendered work settings, right? Highlight how gendered mental health issues are inscribed in gendered structures of STEM work settings. We will then go on to explain how mental health issues are interpreted as incompatible with ideal work expectations, right? And highlight the emotional impact of women as they worried about their career implications, worried about the career implications of being associated with mental health issues within their organizations. Finally, we'll address the strategies that individuals adopted to move forward in their career, highlighting how these contributed to upholding ideal work expectations in STEM research and innovation. Okay. Next slide, please. Right. So while mental health issues are not always directly attributed to work, right, women argue that working in STEM greatly contributed to exacerbating mental health issues, right? So our respondents describe 4 key aspects of the gendered organizational context in explaining triggers of mental health issues. These were high performance expectations, workload and work hours, normative bullying, microaggressions, and isolation. Right. So almost all of our respondents talked about the high performance expectations characterizing work in STEM research and innovation, right? Highlighting the importance of achieving objective forms of success, regardless of one's circumstances. Okay, so Sanya, the first excerpt on this slide is from Sanya, who was an engineer working in the energy sector, and she explained, a case in her organization, right? So Sanya basically highlights that high performance is normative in organization and it is inextricably linked to perfectionism. right? Which leaves very little room for any shortfall or deviance, right? She suggests that she finds perfectionism challenging, a very challenging target to achieve, and its pursuit can lead to people like herself compromising on their emotional well-being, right? So other respondents similarly explained how mental health issues were triggered as they worked very long hours to achieve a sense of perfectionism, which was in line with high performance expectation in their occupation, right? So the second excerpt is from a lady called Leslie, who worked as a mechanical engineer, right? She also talks about how she's very extremely conscientious, and she does long hours, presenteeism to ensure that everything is perfect, right? Which led her to have a breakdown, right? And her symptoms of anxiety and depression to exacerbate, right? And then we have the excerpt of a lady called Camilla, who worked as a safety engineer. She had a background in chemistry, right? So she reflected on her previous role, suggesting that she has internalized high performance expectations and thus plunged through to fulfill the demands of what she saw, as the demands of her role, right? And her account highlights how mental health issues, which is anxiety and stress in this case, can be exacerbated due to having very little control over one's work. Next slide, please. So more into contextual triggers of mental health issues in STEM. So a notable feature of STEM, work in STEM research and innovation, appeared to be that microaggressions and bullying, right? So, and this was normative, right? It was sometimes taken as normal in the way it is in certain sectors. So many respondents described this as an institutionalized cultural feature of STEM and implied that women are just expected to deal with it as everybody else is, right? And to demonstrate their resilience, right? So I have the excerpt of a theoretical biology scholar called Kelsey here, right? Who highlights how she developed social anxiety because of her traumatizing experience, right, with regard to supervisors. And this constrained her ability to interact normally in an organizational setting. And likewise, we have the second excerpt from a lady called Harriet, who worked as a civil engineer, who similarly explains how she left 2 organizations due to the microaggression and discrimination that she encountered, which significantly exacerbated her mental health issues. So we have to note that while not all participants, right, had experienced microaggression and bullying to the same extent, right, they agreed that it is a notable feature of STEM work in STEM, where women can experience significant trauma due to this, right? And it also depends on who they happen to work with and work for, right? And that this is all very normative. So some women, like Rebecca, noted in the last excerpt, right, they explain mental health issues in terms of the general sense of isolation they experienced within STEM work settings as women, right? Having very few avenues for deriving instrumental, practical, and emotional support from others in the workplace, which made it very difficult for them to navigate high-performance cultures. Next slide, please. Right, so now we come to the second theme, which is on the incompatibility, where we highlight the incompatibility between being seen as experiencing mental health issues and being seen as an ideal worker in STEM, right? So all of our respondents argued that being seen as experiencing mental health issues in the workplace, is incongruent with being an ideal worker because it is associated with a lack of emotional control, with weakness, and this conflicts with objectivity, competitiveness, resilience, and other sorts of desirable traits expected from STEM professionals, right? So many women emphasized that there is very little allowance for any form of visible emotional manifestations of mental health issues, such as withdrawal or, tears in their workplace, right? So this is highlighted in two of the excerpts presented here, one of Sanya and another of Elise, who was an electrical engineer in the industry, right? And people also explain how STEM professionals are always expected to demonstrate objective thinking regardless of their circumstances and to be fully in control of their emotions, right? So basically, these codes suggest that there's no room for emotional displays in STEM. But given that women, right, what is interesting is given that women are frequently stereotyped as overly emotional, right, regardless of mental health issues, in comparison to their male counterparts, and are often seen as less than ideal leaders, right, due to the inability to keep their emotions away out of the workplace, right, we might expect any emotional displays associated with mental health, right, to, further exacerbate the propensity of women being positioned as deviant to the ideal worker norm, right? So it is notable that women acknowledge that, it is more common to talk about mental health issues after the COVID pandemic. However, it is still the case that people who experience mental health issues can be seen as weak and lacking its control, and thus classified as unable to, grapple with the demands of a tough and competitive workplace. Okay, next slide, please. Right. Right. So in this excerpt, I have two accounts of Christina and Hattie, who talk about how they try to minimize any mental health issues, many manifestations of many mental health issues in the workplace, and almost conceal it, right? Because they do not want their they're worried about being seen as less than ideal workers and facing negative career repercussions due to this, right? Next slide, please. Right, so in the next couple of slides, we'll be talking about 4 strategies that we found women to exercise in the face of mental health issues, right? These were not mutually exclusive. Many people did a couple of these things. What is interesting about these strategies is that it ended up upholding ideal work expectations in the organization, where women worked harder and strived to be even more perfect in their work in many instances. Okay, next slide. Right, so the first strategy was what we called validating, right? So we call this validating because it involves demonstrating, visibly demonstrating one's dedication to work and perfectionism via working extra hard, overperforming, unjustified availability, and basically women showing that they conform to ideal work expectations despite their difficult circumstances. All right. So here we have the excerpt of Monica, who was a mechanical engineer who worked in the industry, and she explained how she returned to work soon after a difficult miscarriage, which had mental health implications, because she wanted to position herself as a dedicated STEM professional, right? So Monica, she highlights that she continues to find it very difficult to deal with the personal, implications of the miscarriage, right, despite the time that has passed. However, she did not want to risk being classified as an employee who's not dedicated to work by taking time off work, right? And she also suggests that she was reluctant to disclose her miscarriage or its mental health implications to her colleagues, which further exacerbated her mental health issues, right? And then we have the excerpt of Robin, who works as an engineering consultant, right? And she talked about how she had to work extra hard to demonstrate that she is able to pick up from where she left, right? When she took some leave for a personal issue, right, which had significant implications on her mental health, right? So she basically, in her case, she tries to ensure that her past mental health issues are not seen as influencing her present or future career prospects, right? Highlighting the temporal patterns in women's career meaning making, right? So other participants like Christina noted below last, explain how they continue to work hard to enhance their performance, demonstrate perfectionism so that, they can safeguard themselves from the negative stereotypes attached to mental health issues, as well as gender in STEM and STEM research and innovation. Okay, next slide, please. So second strategy is what we called preempting, right? So we call this preempting because women appear to avoid, right, the recurrence of past mental health issues, right, by adopting a mindful approach to how they managed present and future work-related responsibilities and work contexts, right? So, I mean, I had to mention that mental health issues were not something which was, which was discrete. It just happened to appear. In many cases, happened to appear when there was a trigger, it would reappear, right? So it was contingent about the incumbent to manage this mindfully. So some of our respondents referred to how they carefully considered new work roles and responsibilities to ensure that they are not subjecting themselves to difficult circumstances that can contribute to triggering mental health issues, right? So Camilla here explains how she raised her concerns about taking on a line manager role soon after she joined a company, right? So Camilla highlights that she aspired to work as a line manager, right? And she had the required experience to do this. However, she restrained herself from taking up the opportunity in her new place, right? A new place, because she feared that it can, trigger her mental health issues, right? So the point is that preempting, the way we saw it, appeared to constrain women from pursuing career enhancing opportunities and restricting themselves to safe spaces. But it did not necessarily influence their contribution to or productivity to the existing role, right? So they restricted themselves from pursuing career enhancing opportunities, but they were fully productive and they gave their 100% to existing roles, often working longer than is necessary, right? So other participants similarly talked about how they were hesitant to pursue attractive career opportunities in new organizations, or even sometimes move to new organizations because, they were afraid of, getting into difficult contextual circumstances which would trigger their mental health issues, right? So in the case of Harriet, a civil engineer, right, she, as noted, she shared a series of bad experiences with previous employers, which contributed to exacerbating her mental health issues. She now worked for a council, right? And her present employer offered only little opportunity for career development. But she felt that it was a safe space in contrast to her previous employers, and thus she settled for limited opportunities to avoid the recurrence of past mental health issues. Okay. Next slide, please. Right, so third strategy is what we call recuperating, right? Recuperating involved taking active measures to swiftly recover from mental health issues when these were experiences, right? When these were experienced. So people basically talked about mobilizing a range of formal and informal support structures, such as deep conversations with family and friends, workplace provided therapy lines, counseling sessions, cognitive behavioral therapy, which was really, really highlighted by many people, right? So the point was to engage in these things and, get back to normal, as what they saw as normal, as soon as possible, all right? So civil engineer Hattie, noted here, talked about how undergoing therapy, right, helped her to recuperate and effectively navigate the mental health challenges she faced in previous organizations, right? Then some women like Tina, noted here, right, described recuperating via therapy as a liberating experience, right, which enabled them to go beyond recovery to discover themselves, and better understand how they experience and respond to the occupational environment. Okay. Next slide, please. So the final strategy is what we call deploying, right? We call this deploying because it involves using one's experiences of past mental health issues, right, to make a difference to others in the workplace. So women engaged in deploying via sharing stories of their past mental health issues in formal organizational and occupational platforms, as well as educating, training, and advising important organizational actors such as HR personnel in the light of their past experiences. So in contrast to the other strategies noted about earlier on, right, deploying obviously moved beyond the self-focus to the focus of the betterment of others, right? And it was aimed at facilitating the discussion of mental health issues within the workplace, right? And driving social structural changes. It is notable that this strategy was adopted by mainly mid and late career women who, obviously had some sense of power and a stronger sense of agency due to their seniority in the organization or profession, right? And these women arguably felt better able to safeguard themselves from the stigma attached to the past mental health issues within the workplace, right? So Lara, we have the excerpt of Lara here, who has over 25 years of experience in the cyber industry. And she explains how she shares her past experiences and coping techniques to help other women in her profession and let them know that they're not alone, right? It is notable, however, that many respondents, right, like Victoria noted in the second excerpt, right, somewhat conceal the full range of challenges that they experienced, right, focusing instead on telling others about how they successfully navigated mental health issues to maintain their professional credibility, right? So this is I think we thought that this was particularly interesting, right? So it was about how you navigate successfully, make the best out of circumstances. And some women, like Amelia, talked about, how they, became mental health campaigners, right? Going beyond sharing experiences to actually campaign for change. Next slide, please. Right. So overall, right, if we reflect on the interplay between gendered ideal work expectations and women's mental health issues in STEM, right, our findings suggest, in the light of the findings, we would suggest that mental health issues sort of operate to discipline highly skilled women to ensure their careers, to secure their careers while conforming to normative organizational occupational expectations, right? So, our findings, as we said, we highlighted how women would feel a sense of worry, right? Emotional experience of worry as they reflected on the incompatibility between being seen as experiencing mental health issues in the workplace and being seen as an ideal worker, and how these emotions, right, how the worrying about this incompatibility would discipline women to negotiate some sort of an alignment, some degree of alignment with ideal work expectations through their career work, right? So through strategies such as validating and recuperating, women make themselves responsible for increasing their own value, right? They're responsible for making, coming out of it, they take the onus of responsibility on themselves to enhance their careers and make sure that the workplace is not disturbed by any of their experiences, right? While some individuals, are more reflexive about their position, right? And they could act as change agents, but most women underpinned by worry, we would argue that they continue to contribute to upholding gendered organizational expectations. Next slide, please. So I mean, there's a bit of theory because we used, I mean, I played down this theoretical part in this presentation, but we used the construct of career work, which is a form of social symbolic work in our paper. And I mean, so basically we argue here that we show kind of like a temporal patterns in career work, right? Where career work is inextricably linked to interpretations of the past and anticipated future. Career work in the face of mental health issues, right, is inextricably linked to the interpretations of past and anticipated future. It does not operate at isolated moves, which provides a more holistic perspective of the full complexity of women's career agency in the face of mental health issues. Right. For example, the validating strategy eliminates efforts undertaken by women to ensure that their past, past manifestations of mental health issues does not hinder one's present circumstances or future prospects. Preempting involves proactive moves undertaken to in the present to ensure that mental health issues would not be triggered in the anticipated future and constrain work and career. Right. Recuperating similarly involves efforts undertaken in the present, right, to ensure one's future career prospects because you want to get better soon and not jeopardize your future career prospects. Deploying involves leveraging, one's past in a strategic way to make a difference to the present and the future circumstances of work. So these temporal patterns in women's career work, we argue, illuminates them as mindful agents who have the capacity to anticipate the links between the past, present, and future and make career moves in the face of this. Next slide, please. So finally, how do people maintain a career in the face of mental health issues? We argue that this happens via a mechanism of simultaneous engagement and disengagement, right? So in validating, people demonstrate their conformance to organizational, occupational expectations to key gatekeepers while simultaneously safeguarding themselves to some extent from stress and burnout via preempting, right? So they're in preempting, they disengage a bit to safeguard themselves, while in validating, they engage to, demonstrate their conformance to key gatekeepers. Through the recuperating strategy, they ensure that they recover in a way that they, they engage, fully engage. In a way that they can fully engage with the workplace, right? And then through deploying, people contribute to driving incremental cultural changes in their workplace, which will benefit themselves and others as well in the long run. So what we're saying is it's simultaneous, you disengage, but you engage as well. And you need to do both because prioritizing one approach over the other can risk being pushed out of the career game altogether. So, right. So if you have mental health issues to maintain a career, you may have to do this simultaneous engagement and disengagement. Final slide, please. Right. So there's a couple of implications, right? So even though many organizations are addressing diversity, inclusion, and mental health, the features of work, right, continue to be the same. They're normalized, internalized, and the gendered features are perpetuated within work settings, right? So I think from that perspective, we think that policymakers should reflect on the triggers of mental health issues, right? Workplace triggers of mental health issues and see how these can be addressed. Maybe it's via workplace culture changes or means such as educating staff about the implications of microaggression and well-being in the workplace, right? It could be through leadership by example, right? So the COVID pandemic has certainly increased conversation about mental health issues in the workplace, right? But the idea that mental health issues conflict with being seen as an ideal worker, who has potential to progress in STEM remain entrenched, right? From this perspective, it is very important to take steps to foster cultural change to challenge and transform normative assumptions and beliefs that govern work settings. Right. And people, right, let's say career guidance counselors and as well as female careerists, can reflect on the implications of their career work, right? And to consider how, their actions contribute to change or maintenance of long-standing social structures in their work settings, right? So these are just a couple of things that we are grappling with at the moment. Next slide. And thank you for your time. All three of us are here, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you very much. Lots of food for thought there. So without further ado, I will invite Hadar to give her presentation, and then we'll have a look at the questions that people are putting in the Q&A box. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Just give me one moment. I'm trying to share this, hopefully with great success. Let's have a look. Okay.
That's working now.
Great. So I just need the previous slides. Just one sec. Here we are. Okay. So good afternoon, everybody, and lovely to see you here virtually. So my name is Hadar Elraz, and I am based in Swansea University. And this is emerging findings from a very small BA level funded project, which aimed to look at, well, we said those identified as female academics. How do they experience the contemporary workplace in UK higher education? And how does that kind of like intersects with their mental health experiences? So overall, the sort of the emergence for what we felt was, oh, sorry, I do want to just to say a couple more things. We have had a researcher on this project named Heather Sutherland, who was working very limitedly part-time because of the restricted funding on this. She's now at York, at one of the universities in York. And then we also had Louisa Hardwick, also working very limitedly as a researcher on this project as well. So that was all a great support for this current funding. So we thought that there was a value in really unpacking the current UKHE sector, because we felt that there is a sense of kind of like excessive expectations from all workers. So if we kind of like try and unpack this a little bit, then what we're looking at predominantly is we're looking at a neoliberal ideology, which I'm sure won't be unfamiliar to anybody. So the kind of like increased views that the higher education in the UK is perceived as a marketable service where there is global competition between universities, both nationally and internationally. And the competition is kind of like ever increasing, especially in terms of attracting students and retaining them and attracting fundings and so on. And it's probably not going to be surprising to anybody here at all that clearly changes in governmental allowance for students' visas had a dramatic impact upon those experiences as well. So in a way, very kind of like timely in that respect. So when we kind of like trying to conceptualize the current university, we are looking at an entrepreneurial approach where which again tries to adopt a business model and perceive employees as a predominantly providing service. So I'm just gonna try and move on to the next slide. Just right. Okay. No. Right.
Hadar, you might want to try page down.
Yeah.
That might do the trick.
To do what?
Press the page down button.
Oh, yeah.
That
Does it work? No,
No.
not at all. Okay, let's try it again. There we are. So again, in terms of student experience, we are sort of experiencing again intensification here in terms of service quality. Workers are expected to have authentic relationships with students, great academic outcomes, good value for money. So in a way, there's sort of the assumption that if a student fail, well, I mean, potentially the academics might well be questioned. In terms of tuition fees, again, there has been this has been rising significantly, and we are also all aware of the increasing cost of living, which in a way also kind of like intensified and questions the value that higher education can have upon students, especially given those circumstances. So when we are considering academic stuff, and I'm talking about academic stuff in general, so whichever gender that might be. So we're talking about great pressure to meet those marketization goals, facing casualization in terms of employment, job insecurities, and a blur between home and work boundaries. Now, when we try and unpack health conditions in the workplace, and well, I will kind of like obviously narrow this down to mental health conditions, but we really kind of like can have a broader understanding in terms of health conditions and disabilities, that work intensification is clearly more challenging for employees with health conditions. And the disabilities in the workplace are unfortunately under-researched. And so we don't really know. We know a little bit about this. Clearly, there has been some research, but without a doubt, to a much lesser extent than you would find in any other aspect of marginalization, such as gender, sexuality, ethnicity, and so on. So when the disabilities are comparatively are invisible, such as in the instance of mental health conditions, then there are greater considerations here, which to an extent, again, unfortunately, limit the amount of research, or we know that there is limited research on this topic. So what we do know, however, that there is a kind of like a broad overall agenda in terms of disability research of blaming the victim mentality. So, right, you've got a disability or you've got a health condition, but we still expect you to perform. And rather than really kind of like adopting a more genuinely inclusive approach. And what we also know is that there is a breadth of organizational research which relates to mental illness and how individuals navigate in the workplace. And this is even more so the case under conditions of work intensifications and excessive performance demands. And we know that it is even more so the case when we are looking at the intersection with gender. So gender, mental health, and UK higher education. So when we look at the gender pay gap, we know that despite existing pay structures which aim to reduce it, there is still a very persistent gender pay gap remaining across universities, and that women's career progression is hindered. It's hindered by breaks in work, such as maternity leave, which reduces research outputs and academic visibility. But there are other reasons, potentially, why women's career are being hindered. So in academia. So in terms of labor visibility, there's also some research that tells us about how women are more frequently tasked with organizing knowledge shared events and longer time commitments, which then reduced their time allocation for the research or the research outputs. Again, when we look at work allocations, we know from emerging research that there is often women are being allocated caretaking and student support roles, and sadly, again, this is has been found to be more so the case for early career researcher women's, which then limits opportunity for promotion. So what we really wanted to unpack is that interface between women academic, the experiences of the contemporary workplace in the light of work intensification in UKHE, and what are the implications for mental health? So what did we do? So we carried out 43 semi-structured interviews with academics identifying as women or females and having had mental health experiences across UKHE institutions. Now, just a couple of words about this notion of mental health experiences, and I said mental health conditions earlier, and I've also mentioned disabilities and health conditions at large. So the approach that we took in this small research was that similarly to what has been stated by our first speaker, we kind of like were looking for any women academic who is willing to speak to us about their current experiences in UKHE and in the light of their mental health experiences. So we weren't too bothered about whether or not somebody had an external diagnosis or diagnosed themselves. But having said that, the vast majority of our participants have been diagnosed at one point in their lives before, but they have kind of like drew upon generalized mental health experiences. Now, if we kind of like again, just to give you just a tiny bit more nuance here. So mental health experience or mental health condition can be classified as a disability or a health condition under the Equality Act. And what would classify it is just the regulation itself, which says if you have a condition that limits your ability to function on a day-to-day basis and carry out routine activities at home and at work, then you would classify as a disability, as somebody with a disability or a health condition under the Act. With mental health, actually similarly to many other health conditions as well, it's not necessarily that an individual would always have an intensified experience that would limit their ability to cope or carry out activities at home or at work on a day-to-day basis. And therefore, there is a kind of like ebb and flow nature to it. So, for example, an individual might experience excessive anxiety, and that excessive anxiety might limit them so much so that they potentially wouldn't be able to leave the house. But then maybe they would improve, and 2 weeks down the line, they still have a little bit of anxiety, but they are able to carry out day-to-day activities. So these are the nuances and the sort of the medical modelized definitions that we weren't really too bothered by in that instance, because we were really keen to find out the individual stance to tell us about your mental health experiences in the light of working in UKHE. And the recruitment was carried out through advertising information about this research in social media, professional networks like LinkedIn, and so on, and emails, sending emails out to email lists, etc. So the interviews lasted for about 1 hour. They were recorded and then transcribed and immediately anonymized, the recording has been deleted immediately thereafter as well. So what we did, well, we still kind of like, the analysis is still unfolding, and there is a lot there. Every transcript was between 15 and 25 pages of data. So it's still kind of like in the process, but we can see some emerging findings. So what we did, we started off with a thematic analysis. So we read the interviews, identified themes and sub-themes, linking them to the literature and repeating again and again and again, an iterative process. But what was really interesting was the possibility to try and engage these findings with a more critical Foucauldian discourse analysis approach. Now, Fernando did tell me that there might be quite a lot of practitioners in the room, so I don't want to bore you with some too much theory, but just to say the overall approach is that the notion of discourse or discursive analysis really takes into consideration the power dynamic relations that we've got in society, and how that really impacts knowledge production. So who is speaking? What is your sort of what's the sort of legitimacy have you gained to say what you say? And then this brings it back to the individual and creates certain identity. So I'll just give you a very, very quick example from the mental health or mental illness discourse. So, for example, a Foucauldian discursive analysis would then argue that a medical health professional would certainly be qualified to generate knowledge and have the power to kind of like, provide a medical definition, describe to the individual suffering how they feel, and so on and so forth. And then in that way, an individual becomes a subject or tries to really take on this external, say, a medicalized label, etc., etc., etc. So the idea is that in order that potentially there is kind of like less agency for the individual to counteract those big hegemonic discourses. So what we sort of felt was that these three levels of work intensification, mental health, and gender could be perceived through this kind of like critical lens, and in as far as they really kind of like create individuals as potentially weaker subjects, or kind of like they limit their agency to really act back and change the system overall. So I've got some quotes here, and I wanted to kind of like just give you a bit of a sense of what was discussed when our participants talked about, for example, work intensification. So here is, if you look at the top quote, I got to a point at Christmas where I thought I was going to be ill if I didn't stop. So I just thought, I'm actually now not going to work on Sundays. That was all I was gonna do. I was just not work on Sundays. And we also kind of like, in terms of intensification, it's not necessarily just the amount of, well, you can see clearly a very radical a set of experiences, but the intensification had different dimensions to it. One of a significant one, was the sort of the amount of hours being worked. But others, as you can see here, have intensification also in terms of emotional burden and mental health kind of like toll on them as well. So another participant told us a lack of proper management that can come particularly from research contracts that have held, where it's very output focused and not human focused. Again, that can also lead to a sense of intensification. And very interestingly, quite a lot of participants told us that institutions, they wouldn't kind of like tell you, oh yeah, you should work overtime, right? Because it's not within your legal contract, but they don't really prevent employees from harming themselves through overwork either. So kind of like suggesting that, and I'm sure I'm not going to surprise anyone here, that there is this kind of like assumed culture in academia that in order to sort of be the real academic or to be very productive, then of course it is expected from you to work way beyond your 35 or 37 full-time contracted hours. And then very interestingly, again, the workload model. So again, I'm assuming that most people are familiar with that. For those who aren't, then this is kind of like an allocation of take a calculation of the amount of kind of like contracted work hours per year. and then divide it according to the different tasks which you may have on your in your employment contract. So very interesting here. One participant told us this is very much a square peg, round hole kind of approach, where in order to make it fit, they just shave things off in random places. Like, oh, you know, that's module that takes 36 hours to teach, we're only going to give you 25 hours. Okay, well, who is teaching with me? Well, no, you have to teach it all. You have to teach all of it, but we're only going to give you 25 hours to teach it. So you can see we're kind of like seeing quotes here that are on the verge of potentially exploitation. So when we really look at our gendered sample, so we interviewed female academics, those identified as females, and they asking them to tell us about their experiences. So you can see here some more specific gendered quotes. So in the top one, men can get away in academia with just doing the job, can't they? Whereas women are very extracurricular, like do the caring stuff as well. And so on, is showing that you care about the topic, the yes girl kind of attitude, and so on. And if you look at the well, the second one from the top is people talk about women academics having to shoulder more of the emotional labor. And then if we move on, I think I see it as an internalized misogyny from other people. A woman will do this administrative type role, they'll be able to cope with it, but they'll do a good job. And then there's also some kind of like experiences of being really looked down at. So when I would go for a little pots of departmental fundings that was available, you know, get these comments back like, oh, it's gonna further this work element, who care? Really negative, insulting sort of feedback back. So there is kind of like an informal kind of duties and things that are expected just to have a lot male and I just have a lot of male colleagues expect me to do their admin for them, right? Even at a quite a high level of seniority, that participant told us. So examples of this could be organizing events and just you know get sucked into things if you're somebody who is quite good at organizing. So more specifically here, there was kind of like a recurrent theme that really addressed the way in which our women participants felt that the emotional labor and the caring in academia, and that included both caring for students and staff, fell on their shoulders. So if we can see these quotes here, if I went to someone with a question, my male colleagues would be most likely to say, go to so-and-so, they'll know better than me. My female colleague will be more likely to say, I know that answer, or let me get that answer for you. So that is, again, an illustration around kind of like caring for staff. And you can see here another quote where I previously worked, people knew, you know, oh, we'll just ask that participant name only to do this, and she'll do it because, you know, we've asked before, and she'll pick it up, and she did a really good job. And then when we think about caring in the context of students, then our participants told us that things like personal tutoring, I think you were more likely to get asked to take just another odd one or two to tease. And then another one here, I feel like there is still certain pressure that being someone who is like a woman identified, I will take on more caring responsibilities, which I never see pushed on my male colleagues, literally never. And then additionally, our participants really drew on some experiences which specifically related to womanhood. So when I was coming back from mat leave, I really felt penalized in my work when I was coming back. And here we can see another quote which tells us that the hardest thing for me is that when I get anxious, it gets worse and with the menopause, you know, just get this brain fog. So kind of like this additional intersection of having undergoing menopause or maternity, and then feeling you know, greater excess amount of struggle in terms of workload or just in terms of work. So really, when we asked about experiences of mental health in academia, then our participants told us that things have been very stressed in my workplace. I think this is because of really very bad management decisions. Clearly talked about stress in academia as a whole. There is a huge over-normalization of stress. So I think people struggle to realize when stress is becoming burnout, when, you know, anxiety around perhaps something like the research excellence framework or exam moderation or things like that, that is potentially becoming more of a problem. And I think there is this grit your teeth and bear it mentality a lot of the times. And the last one here, I have actually, you know, woken up in the middle of the night, not being able to sleep because it's just constantly on my mind. And I was just so stressed out about it in terms of the sheer amount of things that I need to do in that particular position. There is a lot to do, and, you know, sure, I can do it, but at the same time, I don't think it's unreasonable, really, that you should given some support. I wouldn't say that I had got any, though. So you can see a direct kind of like influence or direct relationship between work, gender, and the mental health of our participants. And we wanted to really kind of like find out what support is there for mental health. So the participants told us quite a similar, really repetitive thing, which is, well, let's see, they'll bring some dogs in, or they'll do head massage, or they'll give you a wellness app and encourage you to install it on your phone. And it's loads of well-being activities where it's like, here is another thing that you can do to help your well-being. So really assuming some sort of tokenism, perhaps. There is no particular intervention, like I begged for a number of years to have an extra member of staff to help me with the teaching. I wrote a job description. They only hired that person after I left. So who is now replacing my task rather than complementing them. So the particular thing never materialized, but there is a lot of, look, we care about your well-being. We've got an app for it. It gets so tiring because it's actually like you care, because it's acting like you care rather than actually caring. So lip service and tokenism was certainly a running thread here. So this participant told us that, you know, that when, again, if you go on annual leave, that's another format of being penalized because nobody else picks up any of the sort of the pending work at all. And the last one at the bottom here, there is nothing particularly supportive or put in place that, my view, is university takes no responsibility for being a big part as the employer and pushing people with excessive workload to have mental health episodes and take no responsibility for that. It's all seen as on individual shoulders. So yeah. We are aware that we didn't really want to end with such a pessimistic note, and we were very keen to try and identify what solutions did the participants kind of like highlighted. So here they said, I think there is a need to be some awareness there that actually there is an individual difference. Everyone is different. Everyone has different life stories. So maybe they are in a position where they cannot cope, like not in this instance, but maybe they do have caring responsibilities, for example. So here the call was to try and identify individual difference and not assume that if one person is kind of like capable to keep up with these excessive working conditions or working circumstances than the other person would as well. So kind of like it's a critique about this normalizing the idea that as academics there is sort of maybe a hidden expectation that you just work and work and work. And this one here, the next one, is really a call for management. So come back and see what it's like to care for this population of students, and then go back up and make some of the decisions on your budget or on where some money can go and where extra stuff is needed. Because when you're looking down on it, your perspective is not the same. So again, that was a critique, a very kind of like contemporary critique over managerial decisions and potentially financial constraints that most universities are faced by, which don't really accommodate the on the ground floor, say, shop floor experiences of most academics. So if we really kind of like carry on and just try to identify a few more recommendations for practice, then we can see that here on the left, those who register as carers or identify as carers, not just women, more flexibility and more recognition in terms of workload, working hours, and handling emergency. So more backup for those experiencing emotional distress or emergencies with people they care for. So they felt that is very kind of like practical hands-on suggestion, which, and of course, it's not currently available in most institutions. The next one is more around structural change. But with quite a concrete suggestion here. So a more realistic workload allocation that recognizes gender differences in workload. So recognizes that female academics carry the burden of emotional or pastoral work because of gender stereotype internalized by students. So it is a preventative measure that assumes that taking the pressure of female academics will improve mental health, and in doing so, universities and managers should be more aware of the intersectional experiences of the workplace. And of course, this was also identified by Sang et al. In 2024. The next one is more to do with a collaborative or leadership shared responsibility role. So rather than pursuing the ideal worker narrative, and that was described well by the previous presentation, then departmental leadership role held by academics should be collective rather than individuals. This may be particularly beneficial to those that are unable to maintain full-time employment, potentially because of an illness or other commitments. So it may also pose particular benefits to women with childcare responsibilities and those experiencing menopause and who are carers. And that was this recommendation has also been picked upon by Humphreys et al. In 2022. And then the last one here, both recognizing people needs and addressing them. So I think there is still a kind of lack of understanding about what it is that actually really impacts on people's mental health. And it is those little, for me, so this is one of the participants told us, it's those little micro recognition that people need, and recognizing people's circumstances and understanding that makes much more difference, much more of an impact on people's mental health. So these are the emerging findings, and very happy to take questions. Thank you.
Wonderful, thanks very much. So would the panel like to put their cameras on? And we can take questions from the audience. I mean, maybe I'll start with one or two reflections while we wait for any. Was that the issues are very, very, very similar, whether you're in academia or industry. Because a lot of Dulini's examples were actually people working in industry, but the descriptions of the issues that they're facing seemed quite similar. But then there are these particular things that we have in academia, of course, around students, around the idea of workload models and the kind of constantly growing number of things that we can do. So yeah, thank you both. Really, really interesting. I feel like the ideal audience for a presentation like this is senior leadership, both in industry and academia, because when you've got certain recommendations, I think they're the people that are in a position to start thinking about implementation. But we'll open up for questions. I can see that the Q&A box does not have any questions in it. So maybe I'll ask the other two panelists that are with us if they have any reflections on what they've heard. So Krystal and Elena, is there anything that you'd like to add? Here we have one. Yeah. So Krystal, you asking about temporary contracts and the issue for the extent to, do you want to say your question?
Yeah, just a question for Hadar. Considering yours was more in academia and ours was predominantly industry, I was wondering about, the fact that there's so many people on precarious kind of casual contracts, temporary contracts in academia, and whether that was really kind of adding to that work intensification, because you're often trying to do a job and apply for the next job and maybe finish off papers from the last job, as well as all that, and just the anxiety and the stress that uncertainty brings as well, whether that kind of came up as a theme.
Yeah, so certainly we had early career researchers talking about jumping from one contract to the next, and that was one form of work intensification combined with mental health stress. But unfortunately, we sort of saw experiences of struggle throughout the career ladder. So we had professors, we had kind of like participants in all levels of seniority, and they all talked about very similar things, only the examples were potentially different. So clearly, those who had a permanent role didn't have to jump from one contract to the next and forge new relationship everywhere they went, but they struggled with kind of like other aspects of work intensification or gendered academia, or sort of intersection between their mental health and kind of like female experiences overall, and feeling that those were not really catered for or accommodated in academia.
There's a question about your sample, Hadar, because the first study had a focus on STEM careers, whereas yours was across the patch. So can you recall the disciplines or the percentage?
So we had, the percentage in STEM.
I mean, or just the breadth of discipline.
Not the percentages. Sorry, I posted the question. I just wanted to know if there were what were the disciplines of your participants more generally, were STEM or social sciences, humanities?
They were both. So there was STEM, there were social sciences, they were across the board. And it's true that, there were certain examples that were specific to, say, women who worked in a very male-dominated environment, to say, for example, in engineering. But then other examples where women kind of like were the vast majority of a department. But unfortunately, the experiences of intensification, of struggle, of mental health were really common to all of them. And again, it's the nuances of the circumstances, the seniority, the context of the department that differed.
Thank you. We've got a question from the audience, which is around if you notice any intersectional differences in your findings. So, for example, where there's a additional characteristic like race or physical disability or something like that, in addition to the primary topic of gender and mental health. For example, there was an example of impacts of microaggressions. Obviously, you're dealing with small samples, but whether you notice anything of that type.
So I don't know who is it that I'll just answer quickly, just to say that in our sample we had again, vast majority of participants telling us about an additional aspect of marginalization, whether that's a physical condition, whether that's neurodiversity, whether that's migration, race, etc. So this, and I couldn't present all the quotes in 25 minutes, but there were certainly quotes which kind of like spoke to that and really presented a call for a greater recognition of the intersectional disadvantage that individuals with more than one aspect of marginalization are faced by.
Thank you. If there's one thing you'd like senior employers or in industry academia to take on board from today's thing, you know, for each of the two studies, you know, if there's one thing you could recommend, what would it be? Dulini, would you like to go first? Oh, you just you're on mute at the moment. Thanks.
Sorry, I was typing a question for Hadar as you said that.
Yeah.
Is this in the context of higher education or in the context of?
I mean, I think in your case, it would be employers in the STEM sector, both industry and higher education. If there's literally one recommendation you'd really love them to enact as quickly as possible, what would that be?
Right. I think it is to move beyond the superficial view. I mean, I'm speaking again in the context of my own experiences as well as, you know, my research. So the geared is superficial view of this ideal candidate, ideal manager, ideal leader, go beyond manifestations, because, you know, move beyond and look at the substance of the person, the cleverness, that, you know, you're missing out on a lot of talented labor, right? Extremely talented, valuable labor. And especially somebody like a person who might, you know, for example, struggle with anxiety, or, you know, for context might not be able to do that superficial performance in interview contexts and various contexts. And you're looking at, you know, things like communication, very, very little things of how people think, and you're actually disregarding your feeling in, I think it's I would speak as an HRM, you know, scholar from a talent case. You're missing out on very valuable talent for the organization, especially.
I think that's a brilliant recommendation, and I think in many sectors we have this very narrow view of what a high performing person looks like, and it's first of all wrong. Secondly, it's discriminatory, and third, it's really missing out on accessing extremely talented people. Yeah, that's a great one. Thank you. I think
and a lot of people who, I mean, I would add that
yeah.
a lot of people who have excellent, you know, rhetorical performances, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have substance, right? There is just, you're a very good talker. And, you know, people, I would say in the context of mental health issues, again, you know, in that situation of being, you know, a skilled speaker.
So one thing I like to point to people, you mentioned interviews and recruitment. One thing I like to point to people towards is there's a very nice set of guidelines that's developed in the NHS. They're called values-based recruitment, and they talk about how they do recruitment, and it's really very different. And we've tried to adopt it in our university because we want to learn a lot more about the person and their values and how, you know, how that would fit. So that's a great point. Yeah, let me give an opportunity to Hadar then as well. You know, if there's one takeaway.
Yeah, I mean, can I? Oh, sorry, Krystal, you go. Sorry.
Go on, Krystal, because I think
in the chat, but I think it's just for the panelists, not for everyone. So I was just going to say, yeah, I think values-based recruitment is really important, as long as the employer then manages the staff according to those values as well. Because I think
it should be recruitment and career trajectory and progression. It should be for the lifetime of that person's career. Yeah, you can't just
treat them with the values. Don't just expect them to.
Yeah. Yeah, Hadar, please. Yeah, if there was one recommendation.
Sure. Well,
higher education.
Yes. Well, I would call all the people can influence the industry, whether that's policymakers, senior leaders, you name it. Do you need more evidence? Fine. Get the funding, get the evidence, and, you know, come and help us, because this is just, I can't believe it's 2025, and it feels like we're living in the dark ages. I mean, honestly, some of the quotes I've came across in this research. So just wake up, and come and give us a hand. We can't do everything on our own with those limitations.
I think I agree, and I think Krystal made an interesting point, which was about this kind of sticking plaster approach, that there are, well-being, signposting, guidance or external support, but the kind of genuine support is not really available in many institutions. So she called it well-being washing, and I think that's again something that employers can take a lot more responsibility for. I think they've got their heads around how you make reasonable adjustments for physical disabilities, but I don't think they generally are sophisticated in their understanding of other things. Right, we do have a question in the Q&A. Thanks, Vanilla. I will see if I can see it. Okay, yes. So there's a good question. So that in academia, it's saying that there seems to be a push at the moment for greater recognition and prioritization as empathy as a skill for those in leadership roles to better support research cultures. What would you anticipate from this activity? Greater empathy among men in leadership roles, greater recognition of pastoral aspect picked up by females, more confidence in women seeing leadership as becoming a safer place. So do you see this prioritization of empathy, of emotional intelligence as a leadership characteristic? Do you think that can help? Yeah, Dulini.
Sorry, Alina, do you want to go first? Yes, sorry. You're mute.
Go on, and then we'll ask Alina next.
Go on.
Okay. Sorry, because I heard this empathy and kindness, and I see it as a very rhetorical device sometimes, especially in academia, and it is related to the sort of the diversity and well-being dressing that undertakes. I mean, it is very important that we stick to these things, but we have to be very reflexive as organizations of, when these are used as fodder in a rhetorical way to sort of become very superficial, in the things, because I've seen individuals in leadership positions, mobilizing this kindness rhetoric, things like that. And it doesn't mean anything in even their action or practice. And it's merely like a sort of a colluded effect to, I don't know, to paint an effect of this organization being an amazing place to work, which is not even real. So I think that's one of those things that in any way we use these words, right? I'm not saying that it's not important to be kind and everything, right? It is very important. Empathy is important. All these things are important, but it is also important to think about this discursive rhetoric that we are, creating as well, to be critical about it. So from my perspective, what brings an organization completely inclusive is to promote voice in all sorts, even voice that goes, which is contrary to the dominant rhetoric, right? Critical voice, so that there could be, which makes it a more pluralistic place.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, Alina, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I totally agree. I just wanted to say that the manifestation of empathy as a leadership characteristic has always been there, especially associated and especially in times of crisis. And in this crisis, in periods of crisis like now, for example, a mix of female traditionally characteristics stereotypically associated with female characteristics are very much valued, which also lead to more women taking up leadership roles and then eventually fail. So women, the research shows how women, for example, become the scapegoat leader in times of crisis, where actually this glass cliff, we can observe this glass cliff effect where women actually fail. And I wanted to say that, yeah, of course it's there to have empathy, but I think there is a need to all empathy and well-being, and it's there. But as Dulini said, it is a rhetorical device, and I think we need a change in discourses and a change in practices. So as Hadar's study showed, people tend to internalize the macro discourses that are in place and positions themselves and create in this way. So which takes back their agency somehow. So we need practices, I wouldn't say inclusion practices, but practices that aim to increase inclusion in the workplace. So organizational practices that enhance inclusion and obviously social justice. And these practices needs to be put in place by leaders, any kind of leader beyond, I would say, interpersonal or empathetic behaviors, which sometimes can be can lead even to discrimination further.
Yeah, thank you. That's
Can I just
a
add
very
just
good
one
note.
more?
Yeah,
Sorry.
Hadar, we have to wrap up now, but I'll let you have a
Yeah,
quick
no,
one.
just one thing in this vein, Elina, what has been said, just to say that in that regards, the inclusionary practices, I really appreciated the comments from the research calling for greater recognition that, you know, those, for example, with caring responsibilities, whether that's care for one's health or caring for others, needs to kind of like be more incorporated into a workload model, a work culture, etc., etc., etc. So until there is kind of like this overt recognition, then we won't be able to cross the line to the other kind of like or inclusive workplace in that regard.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Well, thank you very much. We've got a resource that's in the chat that may well be worth looking at. So thanks very much to our speakers, our panelists, our audience with their very stimulating questions. A reminder, we've got another seminar on the 12th of March on COVID-19's impact on innovation, where 3 projects will share their finding. Many thanks again also to Fernando and team for setting everything up, and I hope to see you at the next one. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.